With Showbiz, some of the songs were already recorded because they'd recorded these 2 EPs. I guess they'd done about 8 songs on the EPs. And so what we did really is have a meeting and went through all the songs they'd already recorded and the existing songs that they'd kind of demoed, and chose what to reactivate from the EPs, from the originally recorded stuff, and what to redo, what to cut live again, you know. So we used Rack Studios in St John's Wood in London and re-recorded, I suppose, about 5, 6, 7, 8 songs, I think.
John had been very much part of, you know, the family, if you like, and he'd already made a good, strong, you know, relationship with Matt and the boys. And they talked about how they would, you know, go ahead, you know, and plan the recordings. So the whole recording process was very smooth, you know, very little input from us. I mean, we basically just trusted them to make the record.
Showbiz was released in October 1999 and fused classical flavours with strong rock melodies. Yet the album also contained an underlying darkness that was present from the opening track, Sunburn.
Well, with Sunburn, it's a piano track, really, and I think Matt quite liked the idea of confusing the audience, of thinking that Muse was a guitar band. He'd sit for hours playing that part and just, you know, kind of seeing how to play every note on the piano, starting at the lowest and going all the way up, and you know, it's virtuosity, really.
He was into really classical music. He was into Berlioz quite heavily. These sort of doomy masses that I'm not really sure how he came across them, but that sort of led him down all sorts of orchestral and classical music directions.
The dark feel of that track with the piano was kind of what we kind of went for, really. And one of the tricks I used, I can remember, was I had what's called a throat mic, and it's actually used in a tank, you know, it's a military microphone that you strap around your throat, and it just picks up the vibrations of your vocal cords. And it was all kind of battered, but it's from the war, you know, and it was kind of khaki coloured, and I'd used this for vocals before. And when we were doing the piano, I thought, well, what happens if I just put that in the piano? And we actually just laid this microphone on the sounding board of the piano.
The kind of track that does mess with your expectations of a rock album a bit. It wasn't arrogance, it was just a sense of, we're a rock band or we're a pop band, whatever they thought themselves. You know, we can do this, we can make this sound really work. And that was a very attractive thing about it. Looking back on it now, it does seem a little bit sort of subdued for Muse, even though at the time it was something that just really didn't fit very well with the prevailing musical stride. Everything in music was very sort of plodding and down low, and this was this massive, great sort of operatic noise rock thing. Back then, the boys were in their early 20s. You know, you'd imagine a first album to be a little rough around the edges, a little raw. You know, there are tracks on that record that, you know, sound so confident. You know, tracks like Uno, which just sound like, you know, they're prototypes for a Bond theme almost.
Nothing to me, 'cause you are nothing to me, and it means nothing to me that you breathe into me, 'cause you could have been number one if you only found the time, and you could have ruled the whole world if you had the chance. You could have been number one when you could have ruled the whole world, when we could have had so much fun, but you threw it away.
The likes of Uno, the sort of Spanish flamenco thing, actually was inspired by trips that Matt took around Europe as a teenager. He went around sort of Spain and saw a lot of these flamenco artists playing. I was really inspired by that, and I think that came through on Uno.
Matt was always very much a show-off person with his playing, you know, and his singing, so he'd often, you know, do crazy things with his guitar and, you know, make crazy noises and this kind of thing. So, you know, I just encouraged that, really. I encouraged him to do, you know, do that kind of thing.
Having worked with John all those years, you know, I just knew that, you know, that he would make the record that we would believe in, the sort of record that the band would need to make. And also the band, you know, by that stage had played so many shows anyway that you know, John's job really in many ways was really to, you know, to try and stretch them as much as he could, but we knew they were already a very tight band.
In the studio, we'd often listen to other records, other CDs, and you know, I'm a kind of blues fan. I'm kind of into, you know, Beefheart, Tom Waits, and Love, Forever Changes, and things like that, because that's my generation kind of thing. So yeah, I did introduce. We would play Tom Waits, and of course, Matt was just astounded with that voice, you know, because it's so different to his voice, and you know, he couldn't believe that someone could sing like that, and it could actually be put on a record, you know. So he was quite, and Captain Beefheart as well. I mean, he was very into, you know, not just the voice, but Trout Mask Replica, you know, the crazy sort of rhythms and things. So I introduced him to that.
Too much for my mirror, she almost makes me lose it. The way she abused it, make me never wanna use it. Well, meet your heart and mind your soul. Oh, Chicago, she's the woman to make a young man a bomb. Where she howled like the wind, make my heart grow cold. Made me long for that little red farm. She made things fly, she made things roll. She got me way over here and I'm hungry and cold.
I remember he came up to me once and said, "Jimi Hendrix, what should I be listening to? I've heard of this guy, Jimi Hendrix. He's meant to be a good guitarist, isn't he?" I'm like, yeah. And, well, you know, what track should I be listening to? You know, what should I be getting from him? So he was quite naive about, you know, his taste in music and what he'd heard before.
While single releases Sunburn and Uno, along with Muscle Museum and Cave, promoted Muse's style of flamboyant rock, there was also room for more thoughtful and tender themes, as demonstrated in the track Unintended, that was released in May 2000.
Unintended sounds very different to the other tracks, obviously, because it's acoustic, because it has that almost a kind of softness about it. It sounds very young, it sounds very tender, which are qualities that we wouldn't necessarily relate to Muse today, although there's always been elements on every one of their albums that shows that they have this different side to them. You know, you can see in that track the roots of, you know, everything up to almost the symphony off the new record. There's that sensitivity that they obviously want to express, as well as their bombastic nature. And you know, it's a very early example of that. I think it's a very sweet song.
I think lyrically, actually, they were a little bit naive, just because, as we've seen over the albums that came afterwards, there was an awful lot of, you know, mental gymnastics going on in these records. There's so many topics and conspiracy theories and ideas flying around in these records that to look back at Showbiz now, it is all quite personal, and it's, you've got to remember that album, they'd only just cut out all of the songs that they'd written about Teignmouth and about not liking it and about wanting to get out of their hometown. These were the first songs they were writing about seeing the world a bit and you know, getting long-term relationships. I mean, Matt had been in a relationship with the girl since he was 16 at this point, and so So there was a lot about that. I think it was quite introverted lyrically. Although you've got things like Unintended, this really sort of really moving little